Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first of our Inspire Education Summit series this week. We will be lighting the pathway towards education transformation this week. I'm Alex O'Neill, host of the Limitless podcast and your host for the next 6 days, where we'll be bringing you 12 sessions from experts and thought leaders to explore what a transformational future might look like for our young people. 17 years ago, I stood in a classroom as a trainee teacher, crouching down to talk to a young lady who had tears rolling down her face. There was a babble of noise from the 30 other children who were all around me, and it was time to wrap up the class. But at that moment, the bell went, the girl grabbed her stuff and had to leave the classroom for the next lesson. Something about that moment has always stuck with me. And I saw that at a time where this young lady really needed to speak to a trusted adult or to have some time alone or with friends to manage her feelings, she had no choice but to just carry on the day the school had laid out for her. Something sparked in me that day, a burning desire to unpick this school system and understand how we could give our young people what they needed, not just in terms of academic learning, but in terms of living their lives to their fullest potential. How could we allow them more time for passions, for creativity, for managing their emotions and living life at their own pace? How could we give them a sense of agency and self-motivation to develop their ability to self-regulate and determine their own future? How could we bring compassion and understanding to their days rather than compliance, coercion, and punishment? How could we allow them more humanity? And how could and would that change the world as they became adults? I didn't end up completing my teacher training, but I did continue to search for a way to bring change to the education system. So spurred on by the famous Sir Ken Robinson TED Talk, I eventually started a podcast for changemakers. And then through that, I met Jo Symes from Progressive Education, who's here on the call, and we worked on some podcast episodes, which eventually went live in her Progressive Education Facebook group. We've been working together for 2 years now, and we're both absolutely thrilled to be bringing you together for this Education Summit, and for next Monday, to be launching our new membership community for education startups, which aims to bring together those who want to create new and innovative schools and learning communities, and that will show us what education could look like. Jo and I have been absolutely blown away by the interest in this event. Over 1,800 of you have signed up and want to explore a new future with us this week. And we want these messages to spread far and wide. After the summit, we'll make all these session recordings available to you. And our greatest desire is that you share these recordings with your friends, your family, your colleagues, anyone who will listen really, and spread this inspiration. This summit is the stone thrown into the water, but you can create the ripples that continue for months and years to come and spark a real transformation for the future of education. Okay, before we get to our first speaker, our very first speaker, I'd like to say a huge thank you to anyone and all of you who shared and promoted this event. Every choice you make to share and talk about events like these continues to spread those ripples. So massive thank you from us. And as a thank you to all of you, we've picked a sharer completely at random who will be receiving the first prize of the summit. So we have a prize to give away, which is a freedom-themed book bundle of 3 books to inspire you even further. So I'd like to say a really big congratulations to the Tick Hub, who shared and promoted our event on X. They're a school improvement consultancy, so congratulations and well done. we will be in touch with you and get the book sent out to you. So now onwards. So our very first speaker is a passionate advocate for young people's mental health. And I have to say, is an absolute superhero because he jumped in today at the very last minute due to, unfortunately, Yumna Hassan wasn't able to be with us today because she's unwell. So instead, we have someone else who's equally amazing and is just an absolute hero for jumping in, Andrew Speight. So Andrew's journey in education reform started when he was at school. As a quiet kid at the back of the class, he was just plodding along. He struggled in this high pressure system that undermined his mental health. When he realised it was a systemic issue, Andrew took action to embed a culture of well-being in his school and then spread this well-being revolution far and wide. So exciting to hear from him. He served previously as the Member of Youth Parliament for Blackpool and the chair of Blackpool Youth Council. He currently sits as the youth voice representative on a local school improvement board, where he has coordinated EMICO, which hopefully he'll be telling you a little bit more about, a co-production project looking to embed cultures of well-being through whole school participatory approaches. Andrew won a £15,000 special recognition prize in the 2023 Big Education Challenge with EMICO. He now works as a co-production facilitator as part of EMICO, supporting schools to co-produce well-being solutions that work for the whole school community. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andrew. I'm thrilled to have you here to share your thoughts and ideas with our audience. So now over to you, Andrew.
No problem. Thank you very much. And I will say before I get started, thank you to all of you for turning out this morning. I know we're on a Zoom call, but I can really feel the energy and the passion for transforming education as though we were in a room together. And thank you again to Joe and to Alex for giving me this opportunity last minute. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alex, you able to share these slides, please?
Yeah, let me just work out the tech and I can certainly do that for you.
No problem. Okay, so I had a horrible experience of school, as has been indicated. For me, school was not the best time of my life, as it is often portrayed as for many young people. Rather, it was characterised by bitter conflict, dire stress, and generally poor mental health. All too often, we can be presented with a very one-sided image of education, thank you. Yet, if we are to meaningfully rethink education and move it forward, we must draw on a broader range of lived experiences of the system. I'd like to share with you my story of the hardship and trauma I went through at school, and how I drew upon that experience in a constructive manner to change my school for the better. Specifically, we're going to look at the solution that was born out of a year and a month of tedious discussions between me and my former school, the culture of well-being, and the promise this holds for addressing the youth mental health epidemic that is spiralling out of control. Also, we'll be considering how we can holistically change school cultures, incorporating every level of the education system and leaving no stone unturned. I went through most of my education with an attitude of indifference. I was never one to enjoy school, yet I never really questioned my circumstances. I just plodded along, doing what was required of me by law. But when I came to secondary school, the balance was upset a bit. One of the protective factors that the school environment can offer for young people is friendship and belonging, and that is one of the most innate needs for all people, particularly during adolescence. Now, I had been quite reclusive hitherto, but when I got to year 8, the second year of secondary school, my friendship circle expanded and I became part of a solid group of 4 lads, and I also enjoyed success on the romantic front. I valued these relationships deeply, but became paranoid that actually my friends didn't value me in the same manner. I worried that they were actually going out and doing all sorts of things outside of school without me, that I was actually excluded, not part of the group, and that they didn't necessarily identify with me as I did with them. This climaxed at around 20 to 4 on the afternoon of Thursday the 5th of May 2016 in an exchange of hurtful words and actions from both myself but also from them. This caused my worst nightmares to manifest themselves in reality. Now, I really wasn't part of the group anymore. Having been so attached to these relationships emotionally, the sudden loss of them caused my mental health to rapidly and severely decline. What ensued over the following 3 years was manipulation, mind games, and general animosity towards each other that damaged my mental health particularly badly as, unlike them, I didn't have other friends to fall back on for support when things went wrong. I also endured death threats and disgusting sexual abuse from some of these individuals. Day after day, I was being forced to associate with the people who were doing this to me, and despite literally getting on my knees and begging to my parents to get me out of there, it perpetuated and deteriorated. To put this into a systemic context, I was finally able to make the break from these relationships in year 11 after building up enough confidence in myself to realise that I didn't need to depend on other people for my happiness. But I was only able to do this after having the time to explore what worked for me and what made my heart sing, finding a new raison d'etre that brought joy to my life. Yet we often find in the mainstream education system that young people are deprived of this time due to a rigid, controlled timetable and intense demands on the school to ensure that they meet certain milestones and objectives. Plus, forced association. Young people can't really leave those peers who torment them if they wanted to. There's a point here about greater freedom in education that I'll pick up again later. Around the same time as all this was going on, however, my younger brother, you can see pictured there, was preparing to take his Year 6 SATs, which is the elementary school leaving qualification here in England. Although only 2 years had elapsed since I had taken mine, the UK government had reformed the SATs quite significantly in that time, making them more rigorous. In actual words, more difficult. Suddenly, 10 and 11-year-olds were expected to know the answers to questions such as explain what the past progressive tense is, differentiate between a subordinating conjunctive and a coordinating conjunctive, and set out the definition of a modal verb. I don't know about you, but I'm 21 now and I don't have the foggiest idea of what any of that stuff is. The greater rigour necessitated greater sacrifice in terms of revision and study time, denying these young people the innate liberty of play. In reality, this translated into children spending hours trapped inside, drowning under mountains of worksheets and practice papers, a dramatic and brutal contrast to my own experience of the exams, for which, admittedly, I didn't actually need to do any preparation. I spent my time outside of school playing as children should at 11 years old. My brother suffered meltdowns as he cracked under the workload of this abhorrent system. The sounds of his tears, his screams, and his righteous anger became all too familiar over those weeks. To such an extent, I can still hear it in the back of my mind right now. It wasn't just my brother. When the dreaded day eventually came, Monday the 9th of May 2016, the first day of the exams, I came home from school to find our fears confirmed. Reports were emerging from across the country that the new tests had been a disaster. There were worrying reports of classes of children breaking down in tears during the exams, and teachers having to shift from invigilator to counsellor duties mid-test. It was as though the education system had turned schools into fear factories, manufacturing mass misery amongst young people. In my sceptical teenage mind, I interpreted this as a deliberate, calculated action inflicted on children by politicians who consciously took the decision to do this, knowing full well what would happen. I concluded it was morally wrong, and from that day on I swore to get justice for my brother and his peers. But before I came to contemplate the education revolution that I'd just sworn to achieve for my brother, I came to the realisation that these dreadful reforms weren't just contained to the SATs. The General Certificate of Secondary Education, the secondary school leaving qualification which I was being entered for that September, had also been subjected to similar reforms. During a particularly difficult class one day, someone began to rant at us about how our exams too were now tougher, and that the significant efforts and sacrifices invested by previous cohorts would not suffice from us. This was a significant moment for me. Immediately, my mind began to race as I feared that I too would suffer the same fate as my brother just had with his Year 6 SATs, possibly worse. Having seen what my brother went through, my mind produced distressing mental images of myself suffocating under paper and weeping. I realised that this deliberate assault on young people's mental health from politicians was marching on. The government had attacked my brother and his cohort. Now they were coming after me. What seemed like my fight against the system had just become a fight for self-preservation. Going into year 9, the alarmist culture I witnessed that day firmly embedded itself into my school. Significantly more apparent than it had been prior to the exam reforms, young people were being constantly bombarded with dark and dreary prognostications exaggerating the importance of the GCSEs. We were told that if we didn't get our GCSEs, we would be, and I quote, on benefits, on Tesco brand bread and beans, unable to provide for our families, and that all those who knew us would abandon us, writing us off as failures. The only way to avoid this, we were told, was to consistently sacrifice time in devotion to securing our GCSEs, leading myself, at least, to feel like a failure if I dared to take time for myself. Then it was prophesied that we would, and should, as it was made out as though there was no other alternative than absolute glory, achieve extraordinary things and bring to ourselves the laurels of fame. Ordinary accomplishments were devalued, and the consequence of this was that I felt both my prospects narrow and insurmountable pressure being heaped onto me that was ultimately maladaptive in the endeavour to pass my GCSEs, as whenever I tried to study, my mind would obsessively pore over the prophecies, and what I had been told was the scale of the task ahead, generating anxiety that prohibited me from concentrating. My grades began to suffer as a result, ultimately meaning that these prophecies were becoming self-fulfilling. But the effect of the culture on my grades was not my primary concern. The effect this had on my mental health grossly superseded that in importance. I began to show symptoms of OCD and panic disorder. The OCD meant I couldn't even walk straight. One night, whilst out in public, I ended up walking backwards, weeping as I went. A horribly demeaning experience in public. Another occurrence saw me put myself in a situation that was physically dangerous. I experienced panic attacks for the first time ever, having absolutely no idea what was going on when I suddenly started shaking and feeling nauseous at 11:30 at night, as my mother had to help me to the toilet as we thought I was going to be sick. I was literally paralysed by fear. I knew full well that this had come about due to the stress caused by school. I first began to show OCD symptoms during my end-of-year exams in Year 9, where I followed the school's advice regarding hard study time, only to end up with mediocre grades and worse mental health, which eventually had physical consequences. The panic attacks started after we were given only 2 weeks' notice of a major end-of-year exam series in Year 10, which took place against the backdrop of a significant deterioration in the situation for me on the social front. Due to all of this, I came to see education as a threat to both my mental health and, due to the OCD, to my physical safety as well. Although I have now thankfully overcome many of these adversities through a combination of individualised coping strategies, namely meditation, and activism to improve the situation more broadly, I'm still haunted by the spectre of trauma. If, now, someone were to describe themselves as enduring a similar experience to what I had endured, I could have experienced a rather scary trauma response going straight back to that first night I had the first panic attack. It plagues me to this day. I've been left permanently scarred, feeling as though I'll never be fully restored or repaired. It is almost as if every day will now be a school day in the darkest depths of my subconscious. Yet I realised something very important, that I wasn't alone in this struggle. A piece of research published in 2018, the same year I started having the panic attacks, by the Association of School and College Leaders, abbreviated as ASCL, demonstrated that I was one of many young people on the receiving end of a widespread systemic failure. The ASCL polled their membership, comprising primarily of head teachers and principals, and found that 9 in 10 of them testified that the tougher new GCSEs were harming young people's mental health, triggering panic attacks, sleepless nights, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts. Of the 586 school leaders who said that the new exams had led to additional stress and anxiety for pupils, 460, 86%, said they had led to panic attacks. 394, 74%, said it had led to depression. And most worryingly, 340, that's 64%, that's over half, raised the alarm bell on the new exams causing young people to self-harm. I don't need to explain how serious that is because it only takes one bad move when self-harming to unintentionally inflict fatal damage on a young person. The government seemed to be prioritising league tables over young lives. Indeed, further research has found that children and young people are being taught that success is achievable only through accepting the tyranny of testing, the need for competition, and the coerced pursuit of goals shaped by standardised assessments, a finding that summarises the culture I experienced in my own school and suggests is occurring further afield as well. As more and more smut churned out into the news, I concluded that this was indeed a widespread and systemic failure, validating my view that action was necessary and spurring me on even more in a fight for justice. Earlier on in Year 10, I'd instigated my action by standing for election to my school's pupil council, pledging to fight to improve the situation surrounding mental health and exam pressure in my school, and won. At every school council meeting I attended, without fail, I would raise the matter of the prophecies and the toxic nature of communication around exams in discourse between teachers and young people. But despite my award-worthy persistence, every time I raised the issue, it would get beaten back with claims of, oh, we have to do that, otherwise students would have no motivation to learn or study. Not only does such a proposition overlook the fact that learning is innate and instinctive, otherwise how would babies learn to walk and talk, but it also fails to realise that applying such intense pressure does not work for most pupils. Research has consistently shown that when people believe they are being observed and evaluated, when the pressure is on, those who are experienced have an unfair advantage over fresh learners, especially in academic and intellectual undertakings. One such study from Aiello and Douthit in 2001 found that when people are being observed and evaluated learning a difficult skill or thinking creatively, their performance declines as opposed to when they aren't. Due to the school's resistance, Year 10 passed with nothing for me to show for my tenure on the student council. I had been countered at every turn. When September rolled around and I commenced Year 11, the final year wherein I would sit the GCSEs, I stood for re-election to the student council as the problem was still very much alive. However, with little to show for my first term, I came second in a poll of my form group. But, fortunately, the student council had shifted to a model of having 2 representatives from each form group. So because I came second, I did manage to get onto the council, and so the struggle continued. Again, I would raise the matter without fail at each meeting until one day, one sunny morning in January 2019, at a meeting of the pupil council, I raised the matter again, regurgitating all the prognostications we had been given. And I don't know what it was. If I communicated it slightly differently, I was still quite frustrated and it was still evident in my voice, or if I did something different. But it landed on the ears of the staff very differently this time. They shot back, aghast with visible horror upon their faces, that such things could have been uttered in their school. How could this have happened? It's terrible. This time, it was taken seriously. A general notice was issued to all teaching staff, advising them to lay off the prophecies, and the school in general began to undertake a transformation, a cultural shift, away from the culture I had endured, and towards what I've come to call over the years a culture of well-being. One wherein students are taught the value of rest and hold it in equal regards to work, ceasing to stigmatise those who rest as scroungers. One wherein all members of the school community remain mindful of the language they employ in communicating with each other during times of pressure. One wherein students are actively encouraged to put their mental health first and to always take adequate times to do the things that matter to them, for it is recognised that good mental well-being is a necessary prerequisite to academic success. As well as laying off the prophecies, the school initiated better mental health training for all its staff. They ramped up the support they provided to Year 11 students during exam season, putting on mindfulness workshops and significantly changing the way they communicated about the exams to students. And the contrast in the way schools communicated to Year 11 students about the exams is evident in the contrast between how they handled the final Friday before the exams in 2017 and how they did it in 2019. In 2017, they put the pressure on by playing the final countdown by Europe over the school intercom precisely before everybody went home. On the same Friday in 2019, however, they gave a laid-back assembly reminding Year 11s to take time for themselves over the weekend. Although, if you ask me, this alone is too little too late. The healthy communication must be woven into all discourse at all stages of education, not just when it comes to the final exams. And the support should be offered to younger year groups as well. They also amended the school timetable and placed greater value on non-academic, low-pressure enrichment activities, which often involve giving back to the community, going out and doing genuine, meaningful good. They also established an annual Wellbeing Week, which took place each October, and climaxed in a rare free period on a Friday afternoon. Such a thing would have been unthinkable under the old culture. About 3 years later, my school received an Ofsted inspection, the school inspection body here in England. Its previous inspection, conducted in the December of my year 11, about a month before the Culture of Wellbeing was introduced, said it was inadequate in all areas. It was decried as one of the worst schools in all the land. However, in its more recent inspection, its rating for personal development has risen to good. And in only the first page of the report, only in the second paragraph, it is denoted, and I quote, "Pupils cherish the support that they get from staff, including for their mental health and well-being." Clearly, by changing course, listening to the pupil voice, and putting well-being at the heart of their ethos, the school environment significantly improved, to the point where even its staunchest critics, i.e. myself, had to acknowledge the progress that had been made. So, taking a broader look at the culture of well-being now, what does it actually look like? Well, I think my best attempt at giving a broad definition of the culture of well-being is a school culture which prioritises mental and physical well-being over academic rigour and success. A low-pressure environment where trust is placed in the innate ability of young people to learn, and the school undertakes meaningful, effective and co-produced initiatives to improve the well-being of all members of the school community, and endeavours to ensure the sociocratic, inclusive and egalitarian governance of the school. In terms of operationalised actions, I suppose it's dependent on how bold and ambitious you're willing to be. Sure, a culture can be changed by altering the way we speak about things, but culture can also be impacted by policies and structures. I mentioned earlier how I noticed the prophecies became more prominent after the screws were tightened on the system as a whole, so to speak, and the tougher tests made for a tenser environment altogether. In the context of mental health as well, I think it's important to mention the concept of psychopolitical validity as an explanation as to why our culture of well-being must also consider systems-level change, rather than just culture in maybe the conventional sense. Coined by Professor Isaac Pileltensky in 2003, it suggests that we should evaluate therapeutic interventions in terms of the extent to which it examines systems and structures, and the effect all of this has on mental health. So the more the culture of well-being challenges problems embedded in systems, the more psychopolitical validity it would have, implying a greater ability to improve young people's mental health, which is what we ultimately want it to do. As I wrote this speech, I conceptualised a tiered theory of change for a culture of well-being. The culture of well-being can be something quite simple, or it can be larger, systemic change. As you can see on the diagram, the higher the tier you're working at, the higher the reward the entire educational community shall reap. In its most basic form, a Tier 1 culture of well-being involves detoxifying communication between students and staff. It would involve teachers refraining from trying to scare them straight, so to speak, and instead of employing the kinds of prophecies I outlined earlier, just being honest about how important the exams really are, and appreciating the sensitive nature of the subject, and not saying anything that would place too much pressure on students. But I'm mindful and really keen to emphasise that this has to be a two-way street. Teachers too are on the receiving end of toxic cultures within schools, with over half considering leaving the profession because of the damage it's doing to their mental health, according to the Teacher Wellbeing Index. Young people can do things themselves to help implement a culture of well-being, whether that be refraining from taking out their anger on teachers or working to restore damaged relationships with their peers, being proactive in conflict resolution by reaching out to friends they've fallen out with and inviting them to make amends, endeavouring to expand their capacity to forgive so that nobody finds themselves totally isolated like I was. As we move up this weird inverted pyramid of well-being, you begin to see a shift away from individual actions and towards systems level reform. Once you've detoxified the discourse, a school may proceed to, as minded, readjust the school timetable maybe. Perhaps allocating a couple of free sessions in a week or making more time for enrichment activities. These serve to give pupils a proper break from their studies, giving them some respite. What it also does is ensure that the personal development enjoyed by young people in education is much more holistic and diverse, and therefore better prepares them for the non-academic world of work that they will progress into. So another thing you could do, just to think about it off the cuff, is offering additional accreditations for young people and certificates to recognise the development of key transferable skills, so they have another measure of their ability than just exams. Also in Tier 2, we see schools making endeavours to provide those solutions to bullying and interpersonal conflict between peers. This may be through proactively offering and facilitating restorative justice and mediation practices, enshrining that means of conflict resolution within the school system. That's what distinguishes Tier 1 from Tier 2. Tier 1 is just individuals changing their actions. Tier 2 is about systems change within the school. The next level is based more directly in psychopolitical validity and psychopolitical therapy. A Tier 3 culture of well-being would involve significant shifts in internal school governance to a more inclusive, co-productive model. It would involve giving young people a serious, proper stake in school life, and could be done at a lower level through inviting young people to governance meetings, bringing them into those spaces from which they were formerly excluded, and engaging with them meaningfully as equals, recognizing that they too are experts in their own lived experience and can therefore offer insights, as well as trusting in the fact that unless young people experience situations in which they need to exercise competent and reasonable decision making, they are unlikely to meaningfully develop the ability to do so as adults. At a higher level within Tier 3, this governance reform would draw inspiration from Daniel Greenberg's Sudbury model of school governance, the Sociocratic School Meeting, where all members of the school community come together on one body to govern the school through compromise and universal consent where possible, rather than winner takes it all voting, although that can be used if all else fails. Now, you may ask why governance reform would improve the mental health of the school community. My answer is that it would do two things. Firstly, it would give all members of the school community a sense of ownership and control and purpose. Things wouldn't feel so up in the air, and it would ease innate anxieties that arise when we're not in control of our circumstances. Secondly, young people also tend to feel that they have a purpose, a role to play in school, and therefore they no longer worry that they've got no purpose in life. It also helps to demonstrate to them that they do indeed have skills, talents, and merits valued by society, which gives them a morale boost and helps them to take note of such things, a skill required when applying for jobs or university. And I can speak from experience here. If a young person can see their trauma and strife being used to inform positive change that will prevent others from going through what they did, they feel as though there was some purpose in their suffering, and it helps them to come to terms with what happened. We can also logically assume that, if given the ability to shape their circumstances, people wouldn't make it into something that they disliked or couldn't handle. Beyond that, you're starting to look less at internal school changes, less at things which can be facilitated by the school itself immediately, and more at wider structural and policy changes that are determined by national governments. But that doesn't mean we should refrain from reimagining education at that level. That's what we're here to do today. Tier 4 involves reforming national education policies to create a low-pressure environment that almost eliminates undue pressure. So this might be significant reform to the exam system, such as undoing the 2016 reforms that made them more rigorous, or seeking to reduce teacher workloads and improving working conditions within the education sector. And finally, Tier 5 would see a fundamental and historic paradigm shift in how we educate young people, taking them out of an environment wherein competition with one another is encouraged, where pupils and teachers alike are placed under strict deadlines and heavy workloads, and actually removing the concept of a mandated curriculum and forcing young people to go through the experience of having to invest great amounts of time and energy in things in which they have no natural interest. Instead, emancipating young people and allowing them to follow their passions, trusting in the educative instincts and unleashing the learning power of play. In my view, it would constitute a widespread adoption of the aforementioned Sudbury Valley model and self-directed education, making this type of education widely available. So essentially, state-funded democratic schools over a large geographic range. Referring back to the point I made earlier about interpersonal conflict, bullying and freedom, if young people were emancipated to have the level of freedom that they have in these schools, they would have the time to explore, learn, find their ikigai or their raison d'etre, and build that confidence in and of themselves to not be dependent on others for their happiness. If I'd had this, I might have been able to reach that critical level of confidence and happiness earlier, rather than spending 3 years being dragged through the mud by my former friends and by the desperate sense for belonging I experienced in and of myself. Sorry, I've just lost my script. Now, I would like to make clear why it is that we need a culture of well-being, the urgency of this. Research emphasises how widespread and serious the discontent amongst young people is at present. It will come as no surprise to anybody that mental health problems amongst children and young people are on the rise. An NHS digital survey from 2017 found that 1 in 9 children had a probable mental health condition that year. This has only worsened thanks to the pandemic, with a follow-up survey from 2020 suggesting that that figure now stands at 1 in 6. Consecutive good childhood reports have shown a mostly consistent decrease in happiness with life and with school since 2009. In terms of international comparison, children's subjective well-being and satisfaction with school is poor in England compared with other nations. Follow-up studies with young people have seen them attribute these results to the education system, specifically exam stress and standardised assessment. Students feel that the problems start at primary school and then the situation deteriorates as they progress to secondary. And young people have made it clear that this is a general priority for them. In February 2022, young people across the UK declared health and well-being their #1 priority issue in the UK Youth Parliament's Make Your Mark ballot. In follow-up focus groups facilitated by youth councils and members of youth parliament, young people revealed that mental health is what was behind this result, and that exam stress is one of the biggest factors affecting young people's mental health right now. The interconnectedness between education and mental health was also made heavily apparent, and I might also just say that in the 2024 rerun of Make Your Mark, health and well-being came out on top again. So what this suggests is that the manner in which the education system presently operates is reducing young people's quality of life both inside the classroom and beyond. The bile dripping out of the system is seeping into and contaminating all aspects of young people's lives. It reinforces the notion of the schoolification of childhood, that education is annexing all parts of young people's lives and increasingly occupying their time and energy. Most importantly, it suggests that young people feel that addressing this is a top priority. Of course, the research I acknowledged from the Teacher Wellbeing Index emphasises the importance of, and I quote, acknowledging the links between policy decision, workplace culture, and individual staff well-being, and creating strategies to improve the well-being of the workforce, targeted at each of these levels. With a teacher exodus underway and recent strike action, we must address staff concerns in this field, lest we face a chronic workforce deficit. Yet we must think even broader than this and take a whole school approach, for it is not just young people and teaching staff who are affected by the poor mental health that is rife in schools. Parents and carers are also on the receiving end. Many studies have consistently shown that there is strong interplay between the mental health of parents and carers and their children. The urgency of action is apparent in how both students and educators are voting with their feet. Around 2 million students, over 1 in 5, are persistently absent. We know from evidence presented in a written submission by the Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition to the House of Commons Education Select Committee last year that poor mental health is a factor driving these statistics. Similarly, the Teacher Wellbeing Index reports that 59% of staff have considered leaving the profession due to the strain it places on their mental health. Students must Maslow before they can bloom, referring to Bloom's taxonomy. To unlock any other educational transformation, we must ensure that the fundamental well-being needs of those within the system are met and that the system is operating in a manner conducive to well-being so that everyone has a firm foundation from which they can reach for the stars. The fact of the matter is this, that if the mental health and well-being crisis in education is overlooked, the system could soon fall in on itself and quite possibly bring the rest of society crashing down with it. But I don't want to conclude on such a pessimistic note. We can do something about this. Although the task before us may feel as insurmountable as I felt my GCSEs were, this is within our control. That's my key message. We need to take what's been discussed today and turn it into action. Otherwise, the summit will finish. You'll think, wow, that was a great, nice summit. But nothing will actually change unless we follow this up with action. And as I say, you can all do something. You can all start to implement a Tier 1 culture of well-being pretty much immediately, being mindful of how you speak and ensuring your communication is respectful. You can do that from right now. Beyond that, we must mobilise and rally whole system stakeholders to organise and take action to create larger systemic change. We do this by coming together, valuing everyone's insights and ideas, building a consensus sociocratically, and uniting around a common endeavour. Through co-production at the school level, we can initiate Tier 2 and 3 reforms by bringing all stakeholders around the table. In Blackpool, we've been doing this with Emoco, a co-production project that aims to holistically improve the mental health and well-being of all stakeholders within a school community. We collaboratively design place-based initiatives that will help to embed a culture of well-being. We've brought together whole school co-production stakeholders, including young people, parents and carers, members of staff and senior leaders, who all have diverse and unique insights as to what would work for their school community. And they meet continuously to oversee and design the implementation of initiatives. I would like to invite everyone right now to take action and collaborate beyond today. I'm delighted to be able to use this opportunity to announce that Emoco will be scaling up beyond Blackpool and will be available as a programme for schools across England and Wales. Let's take this wellbeing revolution forward beyond today and work together going forward. Emoco will start at £9,952 per school year. This will include having my services as a co-production facilitator and consultant for a whole school year, plus the costs of valuing the time of young people and parents and carers through gift cards, as we recognise that when some colleagues in a space are paid for their time but not others, there is a socio-economic power imbalance that subtly implies some opinions are valued more than others. If you would like to work together, drop me a line at andrew.speight@emoco.uk. By putting systems change in the hands of communities, we will overcome hesitancy to change through democratisation. Systems are made up of people, and change moves at the speed of trust. Quite often, we see change done with, not to, across all systems in society, but particularly education. This is why we can encounter aversion to change, and why change can feel like a burden. But by co-producing change and sharing power like we do with Emoco, we employ the principles of good change management and ensure the change is collectively owned and in the control of all stakeholders. And as more schools embed new well-being-centred practices, the older ones will be rendered obsolete. As we win hearts and minds and people feel the benefit of the culture of well-being at Tiers 1 to 3, we increase the popular demand required for the higher levels of change in Tiers 4 and 5. As we demonstrate that a better way is possible, we render the old system obsolete and create a new one ourselves. We cannot wait for the day where this change will be created for us. That day will never come. We are the agents of change and we must do it now. For example, in Blackpool earlier this year, we won a £2.3 million investment from the Youth Futures Foundation that has enabled local schools and colleges to partner up to offer Key Stage 4 pupils a range of vocational Level 1 or 2 courses as alternatives to GCSEs in what is known as our Compass curriculum programme. Local young people can now study engineering, construction, hair and beauty, animal studies, even esports. Who would have ever thought of that? This is a tier 4 level change, but we've managed to do it ourselves. And we're using this as a blueprint for national wider change. We're demonstrating this best practice to colleagues in government so it can be scaled up. Anecdotal evidence suggests that it has affected a real cultural change in schools, and that it has made education accessible again for young people for whom the system simply didn't work, allowing them to come back to learning. I share this as an example of how we can take action to unlock those higher tiers of change together. As for Tier 5, big up Progressive Education because they and other organisations, such as the Alternative Education Resource Organisation, offer a range of resources and direct support for those wishing to take matters into their own hands and establish an alternative education provider. I know some of the other speakers at this summit do offer similar support as well. This creates Tier 5 change by enabling more young people to access self-directed education and demonstrating newer, better practices in that area. I do hope that one day I can establish such a provision myself, and I will most likely draw on the expertise of Joe and the team to do so. One thing that is weighing down significantly and is thought to be contributing to poorer mental health more broadly is people having what psychologists call an external locus of control. That is, the belief that their circumstances are outside of their control and they can't do anything about it. Despite the scale of this issue and the challenge it presents, let me firmly reassure you, again from experience, that this is something within our control. There are things we can do to improve the situation. And that ranges from all-encompassing systems change to just simple actions we take and the words we say when we interact with one another. Let us leave here with a rekindled desire to be kind to one another, and with an intention to set about building a kinder and therefore more functional system for everybody. Thank you very much.
Yes, Andrew, thank you so much. What an inspiring start to this summit. Thank you, everyone. I echo the comments in the chat, which are just, you're such an inspiring person. The thing that took away for me is that you took those experiences that you had in school, the really, really sounds like very traumatic experiences for you, and you've taken those and you've turned it into something which is making a difference to so many other school children. How amazing, how amazing. Oh, thank you so much. And a last minute talk as well. Absolutely wonderful. So if you're still happy to stay on, Andrew, this is our chance to get to know you a little bit more and a little bit sort of deeper. So we've got a little while to do some Q&A. I'm going to aim to keep it around 10 minutes, so just quite short because we know that Andrew's got other stuff that he's doing today. But for everyone in the audience, if you do have a question for Andrew, please do pop it in the chat and I'll see if we can get to a question or two. But first of all, Andrew, tell me a little bit more about Emaco, because this is your big organisation that you're heading up at the moment. Obviously, we got a little bit of an intro to it in your talk there, but tell me a bit more. How did that idea come about, and what are you working on right now?
So, Emoco came about. So I sit on a local school improvement board, and we identified that mental health was a priority for all system stakeholders, for young people, for senior leaders, for parents and carers, and for staff. So the chair of the board asked that we put together a working party to devise a solution to it. And I was invited to sit on that working party because we know that mental health well-being is such a big issue for young people. We threw around a number of different ideas, but eventually we settled on co-production. And the reason for that, as was put to me by a former head teacher I was working with, was because if schools don't have ownership of it, if it doesn't feel relevant to them, and if it feels like it's being done to them, passed down to them from above, then it's not going to work. They won't want to engage with it and it won't really stick. So we have to co-produce it and do it together to make sure that the change feels manageable and relevant for everybody. So we set it up. We won some funding from Big Change, an education charity here in England. They gave us £10,000 to initially set it up, trial. We're working with a number of schools here in Blackpool on it. And this was part of their Big Education Challenge initiative, which aims to find, fund, and support bold new ideas and leaders with the potential to transform education. Imoca was one of 10 initiatives that won that £10,000. And then we went on to win a special recognition prize of £15,000 to continue trialing in Blackpool and to keep it going. So that's Imoco. As I said in the presentation, looking to work more broadly than Blackpool on that to help schools embed a culture of wellbeing across the board. Involves co-production, bringing together a whole school co-production team who have all the insights necessary to compose holistic and informed solutions, meeting throughout the year to discuss ideas and then implementing them in action. I've just seen a little thing pop up in the chat. Does Imoco have a website? Work in progress, will be soon. Yeah, that's a bit more about Imoco.
Amazing. That sounds like such an exciting initiative. And I really hope that you get lots of schools that are interested because that it just sounds fantastic. So what would be your greatest wish for students of the future in schools?
That they enjoy learning. That they enjoy learning. It's a happy, fulfilling, rewarding experience for them, something that feels relevant and enjoyable for them. To be honest, I would want it so that learning didn't feel like, I mean, sometimes we learn a distinction at a very young age that you have work and you have play. Of course, that distinction does sometimes come into effect in life. But I
Mm.
would like it if we could let kids be kids for a little bit longer. If we could help to make sure that learning felt like play and was undertaken with a playful attitude for longer. That's why I referenced self-directed education. Great book, I'm sure many of you will have read on here, Free to Learn by Peter Gray, I think sums it up very nicely. So yeah, that would be my number one wish for students of the future. It would be that they could enjoy learning.
Amazing. So important. And I think, you say that and also it's been shown to increase learning. Like the more we enjoy it, the more we learn, right? So absolutely makes sense. You've done so much in your not very many years so far since you're in school, and it's absolutely fantastic the work you're doing. If there were other young people out there who felt similarly like they were stuck in school and they wanted to make a difference, what would your number one piece of advice be to them?
It would be to collaborate. It would be to start building relationships with other young people, talk to those young people, talk to the staff in your school, and work collaboratively together. Set up a little working party to discuss what you can do to make improvements and make the change you want to see. There are also a number of organisations, both in the UK and internationally, that really do support young people to help them find their voice, help them take a stand, and help them make a difference. For me, that was joining Blackpool Youth Council. Most areas in the UK will have a local youth council. It was becoming a member of Youth Parliament. Again, most areas in the UK, including Scotland and Northern Ireland, do have access to the UK Youth Parliament programme. Go out and speak to them. It could be through holding a big education conversation, which is bringing together all the stakeholders and having intergeneral conversations about the purpose of education and what needs to change. That's how we got Compass off the ground in Blackpool. Really, talk, collaborate, and if you don't feel comfortable, find those organisations and find those people who will help you take a stand.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a call for action. I've got a question in the chat from Karen Beer, which is really nice, actually. He says, the work that you've done, have you noticed that it's lessened the pressure or helped your younger brother? Because you mentioned him at the start of your presentation.
That's an interesting question. I think It's a bit strange because I don't think it's had much of an effect on him, or at least from what I can see. He's a very laid back guy now, and he doesn't express very much. So it might have had a benefit on him. I haven't seen it. We do sometimes joke about it. He sometimes says, you have me to thank for all of this. Um, but no, everything I do with him in mind. And I know he is supportive of everything that I do. He's a photographer, videographer, content creator now. Whenever I need to do a video or I need some photographs, I can ask him and he will rock up with his camera very quickly and we get it done. So um, whether it's eased the pressure on him and that's what's contributed to him becoming a very laid back guy, I don't know. But he does support what I do.
Mm, you'd hope so. And following his passions by the sound of it. Um, Lois in the chat has asked a really good question, which I would like to know as well as a parent. What can parents do? So we've talked about children or young people, we've talked about schools, teachers. What can we do as parents to help build this systemic change or just the smaller tier one changes within schools?
Again, it's having those conversations with the school, with young people, really rallying and mobilizing everybody to come together and affect this change, building relationships with staff, building relationships with the school, and seeing what you can do to help to help pull that effort together. As with Emoco, we bring parents sit on our co-production groups because we recognize how important stakeholders they are. There are a number of organisations as well that work with parents to help create that change. I know you've got Ellie Costello speaking from
Mhm.
SquarePeg, who's a parent who does absolutely brilliant work in this sense. So identify those organisations, find them, set up your own organization if you can. I know that it's not always easy, it requires a lot of time. But if you can, like I set up a Moco, you could set up something, a program or an organization that aims to create this culture of well-being. It could be, setting up an organization program. It could be, as I said, looking at the resources that are available to help you set up an education alternative. Those are all things I think parents can do. But if you do really want to know more about it from a parent's perspective, I would encourage listening to Ellie Costello, as I think she will have some really good insights.
Fantastic. Yes, and Ellie is joining us later on in the week. I believe she's coming to speak to us on Friday. So anyone who wants to come along to that session, that's fantastic. And Andrew also mentioned about setting up your own setting as well, or learning community or school. That is something that Joe and I from Progressive Education are really wanting to encourage people to do. So we're launching a membership community next week on Monday evening. So if that's something that interests you, do come along to that, find out what's going to go on there at the launch, and we'll be in contact with more details about that as we go through the week. I want to say an absolutely enormous thank you again to Andrew for coming along today. It was absolutely inspiring hearing your talk, and given that that's the name of this conference, that's exactly what we're aiming for. So thank you very much. But before you go, I've got one more thing to do, which is all of these people that have come along today. I thank you very much for logging in today and coming along and being part of this conversation and joining in this summit. And as a thank you, we've got another prize to award to announce in this session. So for turning up today, someone will get a signed copy of Dr. Geraldine Rowe's book, It's Our School, It's Our Time, which outlines a whole school approach to teacher-pupil collaboration. So very well timed and goes very well with your talk, Andrew. So that works well. So let me just do a virtual drum roll and find out who is going to win our prize for today. The winner of today's book is Lois Palmer. So well done, Lois. Thank you for coming along today. And I think I asked your question as well earlier, so fantastic. If you could make sure that you drop your contact, drop a contact through to us, and we can get in touch with you and get your prize out to you. So thank you very much. You can email us, you can message in the chat, either Joe or I, or you can email us at info@educationstartups.org. So thank you, Lois. Okay, that is the end of our talk from Andrew today. Our next session is running this evening. It will be at 7:30 p.m. GMT with Iris Chen, who is a mother, author, and founder of the Untigering movement, who advocates for a more gentle approach to parenting and education. I really, really hope we can see you there this evening. But for those who would like to stay on and meet other attendees today, and myself and Joe as well. Andrew, are you heading off now, or
Yeah,
is it
I might have to head off because to get to another meeting and get someone before then. But
absolutely?
thank you so much, everybody. Thank you again for the opportunity. I've loved coming here this morning. Thank you for the positive response and the comments. Interested to speak some more with some of you potentially going forward. So this has just been excellent. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. It's been wonderful to have you here.